Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Diana Smallridge. I'm absolutely delighted to be moderating this panel. Today we're speaking about agri-commodity financing gaps and the very important role national development banks can play in responding to these gaps. I'm very happy to be part of Geneva Trade Week, along with my panelists, who I will introduce in a moment, and very glad to be connecting with all of you during this time of rather uncertainty. We know that we're in a pandemic, and the fact that we can connect together online virtually is a gift. In our panel today, we have a number of polls, and we wish to put out to the audience. So I wanted to give you a heads up that this will be coming your way, and hope you can participate with us. So let me dive in first by introducing myself. Diana Smallridge. I'm President and CEO of International Financial Consulting. We're an advisory firm focusing on national development banks and other development banks, regional and multilateral. We have been in the business for 20 years. We've worked in over 65 countries, now probably pushing 70, and are very passionate about the role of national development banks. They sit at a crucial nexus in an economy. And so we hope to dig into that a little bit more. With us today, we have, I would say, a nice gender balance in our panelists. Ijeoma Ozulumba, who's Chief Financial Officer of Development Bank of Nigeria. She's one of these very special people who have worked in commercial banking, both in Nigeria and Canada, and moved over to the development side some years ago. So it's a pleasure to have her on our panel. Sumaya Cargill, who is with Bahamas Development Bank. She's head of the unit in charge of strategic development and initiatives. She's the big thinker at the bank, focused on developing innovative solutions and integrating SDGs into the daily operations for the bank. So it's a pleasure to include her. We also have Rodrigo Devaggio. Rodrigo is the advisor with ITC, focusing on inclusive agribusiness systems. He's got long experience working with the European Union and in developing countries in this particular space, so it's great to have him joining us. And finally, Michael Von During, who's a technical specialist, working with the smallholder and SME finance and investment network, SEFIN. He's been involved with SEFIN for a while. They're currently affiliated with or facilitated by with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. He's got broad experience around the world, so it's a great pleasure to have him on board with us today. Our topic today really is pertinent because we're facing, as I noted, some challenging times. And if we can only imagine that the agricultural sector within these emerging markets are facing particular challenges during the COVID pandemic. Those challenges exist not only today, but certainly are ongoing. And of course, agriculture is such an important sector for most developing countries. It provides food security and is a significant contributor to GDP and, of course, the trade balance. We've chosen this topic to discuss the specific challenges, particularly those financial constraints faced by SME agri-commodity producers in developing countries, and how national development banks have responded and are responding to assisting these producers. A little bit about national development banks. They've been around a long time, and the first of which in the beginning of the century, the last century. With us today, our panelist includes an old one and a young one. Bahamas Development Bank has been around nearly 50 years. And if you think of Bahamas as a country, its population of just under 400,000. Now then, match that with our other panelist, who I think is having some trouble joining the WebEx call, but I'm sure she'll join us shortly. Development Bank of Nigeria. It was established in only 2017, so only 3 years old, which is remarkable, and they're doing good things. Nigeria is a population of 200 million, and what we'll find in today's session is the surprising similarities that both national development banks play because of the common challenges and roles that national development banks have. Both of these banks focus on agriculture as one of the main sectors they finance. As we'll hear from Sumaya and Ijeoma, the financing modalities are different. One finances direct and the other one wholesale. But I think it'll be an interesting perspective to hear from both of them. So I think with that, unless my panelists have any comments or questions, I'd like to dig into the topic. And as I warned you, dear audience, that there will be some questions that we're going to put to you, and I hope you'll participate. The first one, to give you a warning, will be around your own experience in viewing what you think the biggest obstacles facing farmers in accessing finance will be. And so that'll come in a little bit. So with that, I want to turn to, I think, let's call it our first topic of conversation. And it's really to establish what is the strategic importance of the agricultural sector. Generally, but specifically we'll get to in the two economies we'll be discussing. As I noted earlier, in developing countries, well, in all countries, it provides food security, employment, a big contributor to employment, GDP, and of course the trade balance. So I'm going to start, if I may, Michael, from your perspective, and being linked with IFAD, certainly in working then at the level of the SME producers. Can you describe what you see as the strategic importance of the agricultural sector as just a starting point for our discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you first, Diana, for that kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be part of this discussion today. And so I would basically say, I mean, from my own personal perspective, and my own interest and involvement in this sector over the years, I think the first strategic importance is just the sheer number of families that are involved in agriculture around the world, which is absolutely staggering if you include all of the family members, which oftentimes are also involved in the production activities themselves, if not throughout the value chain. I would add to that from my current position working with SAFN, and more particularly being hosted by IFAD. Obviously, the SDGs and the role that agricultural plays to address a number of those sustainable development goals are extremely important, and we're really just talking about a large number of those goals that include reduction of poverty, but also the food security, but they also address access to water and climate change. There's just a whole host of different goals that are addressed by working through the agricultural sector.
That's a very, very great start, Michael, in terms of defining the reach of the agricultural sector. I love that how you've described it. It's just simply the number of people impacted, and I think the SDGs, as you noted, speak to that. Rodrigo, I'm going to call on you just from your perspective at ITC, obviously focusing on the trade side, cross-border implications of agriculture, but maybe you could give some perspectives from the work you're doing on the strategic importance of agriculture.
Yep. Thank you very much, Diana. Yes, in the frame of the Alliance for Action initiative, which is an ITC initiative, we work with the agricultural sector, which is a key sector, as Michael said. The number of family, the number of smallholder farmers are quite important in developing countries, and in this framework, we try to create linkages, alliances between these smallholder farmers with SMEs cooperatives. So that is something that is crucial because many times these linkages are not there. So we need to build it. And related to that, I think that it's crucial the local value addition. And that is something that agri-SMEs in developing countries could do. It's not easy, but if we can create these linkages between smallholder farmers and local SMEs, and then we push for the local value addition. It's in terms of growth, in terms of employment, something that could be great.
That's excellent. I think you're touching on two critical points that we're going to be weaving into our discussion in a moment. So to the ladies on the panel, and welcome, Ijeoma. I see you're connected, so we're very happy about that. But I'll start with Sumaya, who's been with us since the start. Sumaya, I had noted Bahamas, is such an interesting country with its population, geography, and of course, BDB has been around for a long time. But could you start by talking a little bit about where agriculture fits in the Bahamas landscape? Because I think that's of the strategic importance of agriculture is becoming all the more important right now. Oh, we can't quite hear you, Sumaya.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diana.
Yes, there we go.
Oh, I'm
Perfect.
sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Sorry about
Sumaya,
that.
it's perfect.
Okay, great. So the Bahamas is a small island developing state with a very small population, as you mentioned. We are very close to the United States, and this has an impact on the kind of trades that we do. We have a GDP of about $12.5 billion annually, which translates to about $32,000 per person. Unfortunately, this high GDP masks a lot of poverty. And since tourism is our primary economy, about 80% of what is spent in country is actually immediately transmitted. So about $1 billion annually is spent on food. And for a country that depends on foreign exchange, we need to make sure that we maintain our balance of trade to ensure that we have dollar stability. So with tourism essentially halted in country, what we're seeing is significant outflow, but not sufficient inflow. So this is almost an existential threat to the Bahamas. So as we look around our landscape, we are looking at potentially building up other industries, and this is where agriculture potentially fits in. Agriculture right now is about 3% of our GDP. And that includes marine fisheries. So by itself, agriculture might be about 1%. It's primarily done on our family of islands. So these are sort of far-flung islands with poor transportation links, limited storage, and it's done at a subsistence level. But if we can bolster agriculture, then we can improve our balance of trade. We can improve the lives of our people by shifting them from subsistence farming to higher value, greater productivity through commercialization. I heard the other panelists mention value added. So that's definitely something that we're looking at from a strategic perspective. Where can we put processing? Where can we put storage? How can we put a dent in our food bill? And how can we ultimately improve lives?
Very well said. Thank you, Sumaya. I think that's a great starting point to understand some of the challenges Bahamas is facing in the sector. Ijeoma, I introduced DBN briefly by saying you're one of the youngest national development banks as compared to BDB that's been around almost 50 years. But you're one of the biggest, certainly a big economy with 200 million people. And I think it's Nigeria's National Day. So happy Nigeria Day. But could I ask you the same question then, in terms of the strategic importance of the agricultural sector to Nigeria? Could you give us a few words?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon, everyone on the call. As you already pointed out, the population is quite large, so it's about 200 million people. And when you compare this to about 1 billion on the continent, you begin to see that it's of strategic importance. It's also still growing fast. So by 2050, it's supposed to double. So that would be 400 million people by 2050. Agriculture is a big part of the GDP. It's about 25% of GDP. And agriculture also employs about 70% of the workforce. Just to pose that on the population, you begin to see how important agriculture is just from the sheer size of the population and the need to ensure food security in the country. So even though Nigeria is a mineral-rich economy, so a lot of the economy is based on oil, the foreign revenues, but agriculture is definitely very important. The need for food security and the need to ensure that the population are gainfully employed also speaks to health, it speaks to security. So that's how important agriculture is to Nigeria.
Excellent. Wonderful summaries to get us started then. And I think we've begun to touch on some of the key challenges in the sector, which is our next topic, having defined some of the strategic importance of the sector to the world and to the two economies we have in focus today. I want to talk about the key challenges in the sector. And Michael, you spoke about just the vastness of impact across so many families, smallholder families. And I think we then all can rally around the importance of this sector to say, how can we improve the livelihoods of these people? Of course, on the other hand, as a buyer of agricultural products, all of us are, we all need our food. The gap between production and consumption and all the process, the value chain, the value added that happens, whether it's in country or abroad, how to make that more efficient. So let's open up that discussion and say, what are some of those key challenges and obstacles that are faced through that whole value chain, all the way from, initial, I guess, crop seeding, all the way to consumption, because it is a value chain with lots of different pieces, and some of them work well and some of them don't work well. So I might just turn the floor, if I may, over to Rodrigo. From your perspective and your research, what do you think is some of the biggest obstacles facing farmers and the agricultural sector? Rodrigo, are you?
Yeah, thank you, Diana.
Great.
I was on mute. So I think that one of the main challenges for the agricultural sector in order to obtain finance is about the that generally speaking, the agricultural sector is considered as a high-risk sector. That is the reality. Financial institutions consider agriculture as a high-risk sector, and we have different type of risk. First, we have external risk like price volatility, weather conditions. That is quite specific for agricultural sector. But also we have a business risk. Agri-SMEs cooperatives many times have limited management capacity. So the SMEs need to improve the management capacity before to get access to finance. And then we have also the problem of the remote location. Many of the agri-SMEs cooperatives are far of the main cities where the main financial institutions are located. So that increased the cost to access to access of these SMEs. And finally, we have the product, the financial product misalignment. So the agricultural sector is quite specific. For instance, agri-SMEs need a seasonal cash flow, which is quite specific. Harvest is in one specific period of the year. So the agri sector needs specific financial products. So these four main risks are quite challenging and need to be considered when we talk about the agricultural finance.
Right. You know, it's interesting, Rodrigo, because I would think you've got, again, from production to consumption, a full value chain and their financial needs throughout. And what you're saying, to reflect back, is just starting at the production side, at the SME, small small shareholder farmers, just even managing their own cash needs, quite apart from, I mean, we'll get to the rest of the value chain, but that alone, just starting there, there's a huge amount of challenge that they face. Risks of, as you say, these external risks, but these business risks, which are understandable. And then, yeah, financial products that just aren't matching their cash flow needs. And so, yeah, I think that's those are very good insights. Michael, from your perspective, where do you see some of the key challenges? I mean, you can focus on a few, or talk more generally about a broader list.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'd certainly be building off what Rodrigo already mentioned, because he certainly touched on some of the main issues that we encounter, but essentially also to sort of explain where I'm coming from with this. You know, SAFN works globally. The work that I do specifically is country and value chain focused. And what we try to do is, because we are a network, we try to bring our different network partners together in order to propose solutions to bridge gaps in financing, addressing agri-SMEs in particular, but really taking sort of a value chain approach. And so, you know, we developed this analysis, which we call an investment prospectus, that essentially serves to inform on where those main challenges lie. And what I can say is really, on a country by country basis, those can really vary. Depending on the type of value chain that we're talking about, those can really vary. And so it's you know, we like to talk about these challenges as being the same across the world, but the important point here is that any sort of solution that we're looking at needs to be really adapted to the local population, to the local context, to policies in place, and to the actual value chain and populations that it affects or that are involved. And so, really speaking to some of those issues, and again, sort of building on what Rodrigo said, the lack of land titling, for instance, and lack of access to any assets is always a huge issue in terms of not having any collateral. So basically, what we're talking about is a lot. Still at this stage, a lot of the access to finance is access to finance and products that are, not really specialized for agriculture yet. And so we sort of apply the same rules to a sector that operates quite differently. Other issues beyond the remoteness, for instance, is also sort of lack of access to mechanization, access to quality inputs, which a lot of these things are linked also to that remoteness, but also a lot of the issues that are related to a lot of these populations being so remote, being impoverished a lot of the time, and also working agriculture more in terms of their livelihood than as a profession. And so it's really just this subsistence farming that adds to this sense of risk, or this perception of risk. And the last thing I want to say about that is that there's also very clearly at this stage today sort of a pre-COVID situation, which already was very difficult in terms of access to finance in this sector, and post-COVID, where clearly these same actors which already struggled to access finance are now dealing with decreasing demand. They're also addressing all kinds of restrictions at the local level linked to the heightened health risks. And so on the side of the financial providers, that only sort of tends to increase their perception and the cost of actually serving them.
Right. That's really helpful, Michael, I think, and insightful, particularly as you are talking about collateral as a kind of key tenet to lending and access to finance in a traditional sense. And so in countries and in places where land title is a challenge to secure, or those people are the farmers themselves just don't have a means for it, yeah, you face some tricky situations. So you've covered a lot of the points that I think we can move forward. Now we've got some, okay, I'm not quite ready for the poll results because I want to hear from Ijeoma, the challenges that you have seen in Nigeria, quite apart from the fact that you're going to be doubling the population and there's going to be twice as many hungry bellies in Nigeria to feed. So Ijeoma, do you want to give us some perspective on the sector in Nigeria and what are the challenges that you see before we get into the solutions DBN can bring to the table?
Okay. Yes, I think it replicates what Michael and Rodrigo already said, but just to be a bit more specific, looking at the value chain. So starting from the input, the cost of input, the inflation, going down to actually production, and seeing that soil fertility is also a problem, and care for land. There are also issues around drought caused by climate change, especially in the northern Sahel. So we've seen all those kind of challenges. And then moving further down the chain during the harvest, I think what has come to fore in Nigeria is the huge amount of the post-harvest losses, which have been estimated about 40 to 50%. So the irony is where you're looking at food security and you're saying that half of what is produced is eventually lost. And this, of course, is on account of poor storage, mechanization not being there, industrialization, the power situation with electricity, also the remoteness of these locations, the transportation, the infrastructure, the road networks, lack of rail services. These are all the kind of things that the government and organizations are already beginning to address. But it just speaks to the fact that it's so ironic that what has been produced is then not reaching to the dinner tables as expected, even though they've already been produced. Also bear in mind that sub-Saharan Africa already has one of the lowest yields in agriculture per hectare. A lot has been done about the rice value chain, in particular in Nigeria, where we saw an intervention from government. I know it's counterintuitive to trade liberalization, but rice was actually banned just because it's a huge staple. There's some research about how many million tons of rice is consumed in Nigeria every year. And so government took a strategic step to say, let's try to produce our own rice and see whether we achieve rice independence. And that's been largely successful as well. So these are the kind of challenges so they range broadly, like Michael said, depends on the particular value chain, which crop. Also the fact that there is not enough value add to the primary goods. So there's a huge tomato harvest, but there is no export at all. There is no way to process that and actually get the comparative advantage of the fact that tomatoes grow very well in Nigeria and it's a huge harvest, but there is no way of taking advantage of that comparative advantage and putting it out there into the trade cycles and the trade streams in the world. The other issue, of course, that also follows from the low level of intra-Africa trade. A lot of research has also been done on that, on how Africa trades with itself only, I think, about 17% compared to how it trades with the rest of the world. And this, of course, is because of the colonial trade routes that we inherited from colonial times. So the whole idea of the Africa Free Trade Agreement is to deepen intra-Africa trade. And of course, research has also been done about the fact that if Africa trades more with itself, then the whole trade volumes globally also improve. So there's connections around there. So one of the challenges in Nigeria then is how to add more value to the primary goods and put them into the trade streams globally and the global value chains for trade.
Yes, so interesting. The list of challenges that you've identified, Ijeoma. I can't wait to ask Sumaya which ones ring true in Bahamas, and I think we'll be all surprised by some of them. But on the trade side, because I think that's a really critical question for Nigeria and for Africa as a whole. And you mentioned, and I find this fascinating, your comment about intra-Africa trade will increase global trade. But in the agricultural sector, what we're talking about, I suppose, is two things. One is local value add, so turning those tomatoes into canned tomatoes in Nigeria so that they can be exported. I think secondly is the export markets and the readiness and essentially the ability for a Nigerian company to find a buyer that's creditworthy, that's reliable in another country. And so, I mean, we could get into Africa, and I'm sure this Geneva Trade Week has talked a lot about it. But in the agriculture space, I would think that the value chain from, let's say, a can of tomatoes into the world has some payment risks associated with it. And maybe you have a comment on that. Maybe Michael or Rodrigo may also want to comment, and then I'll get to Sumaya.
Yes, looking at how you then implement that export idea. Of course, you're looking at all the non-tariff barriers. So it's not just going to happen just because we want it to. So we are mindful of the non-tariff barriers, the different standards, the things around standardization, specifications, the ports, the efficiency of the ports, the way you transport on ground, customs, and then you then go into the tariffs. And in Africa, it's just, there's 54 countries, and a lot of them are in different trade blocks, and there's overlapping blocks as well. And then you have the concept of most favored nations also playing into that. So it's something that has to be carefully worked out. But I think that is also increasing even among the regional blocks. So you have COMESA, ECOWAS there. So there's already some commonalities in the regional blocks, and a lot of exports will happen if the value can be added and if we can prevent the losses that are happening at the very beginning of the value chain.
Good. Rodrigo or Michael, before I turn to Sumaya? Rodrigo?
Yes, if I may. Yeah, thank you, Diana. Yes, in fact, in the framework of the Alliance for Action initiative, we also develop commercial linkages between SMEs at the local level and global international buyers. And I would like to mention the importance of the sustainability criteria. Because now to access to this global market, you need to be upgrade your practices in order to be aligned with the sustainability criteria from an environmental point of view, social point of view, governance, and of course economy. So I think that is something that to me we need to, of course, consider, and it's something that today that is crucial to access to this international market, and notably Europe, but also US, Canada, etc.
Yes, very good. I'm not sure if Michael had anything, but why don't we move to Sumaya? From Bahamas' point of view, the key challenges facing the sector, the agricultural sector and agri-commodity sector. Could I ask you to elaborate?
Certainly. I think everyone has mentioned a number of the challenges, and the Bahamas share. Can you hear me, Diana? So from a value chain perspective,
I'm not sure if anyone else is having the trouble hearing Sumaya. Maybe carry on, Sumaya. It could be all right.
Okay.
Is anyone else having
so we are competing
problems? Or is
I'm sorry, you're breaking up for me too.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm not sure why that is. Sorry about that.
Okay, we're fine at this moment, so try again.
Okay, so from the Bahamian perspective, we have to compete with the United States for everything. We are 50 miles off their coast. So if you think about the way the US subsidizes their farmers, the Bahamas can't compete with that. And then we have very high customs duties. So a farmer has to pay very high customs and VAT on all of his inputs. And then he has to deal with our high cost of electricity, issues of theft, essential, everything that comes with living in the sixth most expensive country in the world. And so as a result, all of our agricultural products are going to be a bit more expensive than what we could potentially buy abroad. And that has largely informed government's position and strategy in dealing with the agricultural industry, which is why there hasn't been as much focus on the sector. We also have to deal with a lack of training. Our agriculture happens at a subsistence level. Farmers don't perceive agriculture as a business. And so for a bank, if you're not thinking about your inputs and outputs, it makes it very difficult for us to finance you. So there's very little understanding of productivity techniques, of standards, and so forth. The issue that the Nigerian representative raised is very important as it relates to wastage. The Bahamas actually produces quite a lot of tomatoes as well. And I would say that about 50% of those tomatoes go to waste because of those lack of transportation, cold storage between networks. We have some islands that might see a mail boat. That's the primary mode of transport, a literal mail boat that goes there 3 times a month. And so when you think about harvesting produce 3 times a month doesn't really work. We also have to deal with the issues of high salinity, climate change, poor soils. We are a limestone-based country. So when you think about the fact that you have to buy dirt, agriculture then becomes a very, very difficult proposition. We're also dealing with this new era of storms. We're seeing storms almost, if not every year, every other year. So when you try to invest in these large-scale agricultural operations, you're essentially playing Russian roulette with your infrastructure. It's not a question of if, but when. And I believe that largely comes from an attempt to replicate these larger industrial systems that we see in other countries. The issue of land is a problem, especially for the Development Bank. We are the primary agricultural financier, but we don't have that much agriculture in our portfolio, something like 3%, largely because of this collateral issue. We are looking at ways to get around that, of course. Now we're sort of revamping and rebranding and moving forward, and I think that we're coming up with innovative solutions. But historically, land titling has been a major issue. So our farmers really see challenges across the entire value chain.
That's very helpful, Sumaya, and I think, again, highlighting that some of the challenges are universal in the industry. We see them and I love the fact that we have the almost 2 extremes of economies, Nigeria and Bahamas, but similar challenges. I want to then get into, I guess, the financial implications to some of these challenges. And when I say financial implications, the financial aspects of the challenges. So in other words, why is there wastage? Well, one option you could talk about, and Sumaya, you're talking about these mail boats that are going to the islands and produce just can't survive. Well, there's lack of refrigeration, clearly. That would be a solution, I would think. Now, I'm not an expert in these areas, but I would ask, maybe Michael, you could give us some insights. You've heard the 2 ladies, you've heard some of these challenges. I'd love to hear from you from the perspective of Safin, again, I'm sure these challenges are familiar to you. What are kind of some of the things you're thinking about in terms of financial solutions to these problems?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and these are a lot of the issues that that are common across different countries and value chains, and I'd just like to sort of come back to one point that's been raised, which is again this idea of value addition, which I think is a very important one because the ability to actually process in country some of these a lot of the more perishable goods is certainly one approach to deal with these issues, because you can also deal with increased conservation of those goods, packaging them differently, et cetera. And I think that the value addition also, we're talking 3 times, 4 times the margins that you get from production, which is too often, I would say, done abroad in countries that definitely don't necessarily have the comparative advantage in that respect, or shouldn't. And therefore, I think that there's a real opportunity there. Obviously, the access to markets is a real challenge, and that's something that needs to be developed. And all of this sort of leads to, I think, is a interesting segue to the role of these national development banks, and sort of at the government level as well, to work at the financing level, certainly, but also sort of at the policy level that's very much required in order to also perhaps interest exporters and bring more of the market to them. But then in terms of the actual financial solutions, again, I just, because of the nature of what we do, every case is very specific. In country, you have a certain set of players. You also have a regulatory environment, and you have specific gaps in financing at certain levels that are not necessarily the same. And you also have different types of financial actors. And that's really what we try to identify and then to address. And the way that we address it, which I think is very pertinent here for this discussion generally, but also specifically to the development banks, is this partnership-led approach, and understanding certainly within the SAFIN network, where we have a number of public sector institutions, we have private sector institutions. We tried to bring together all of these different actors who play different roles, have really different takes on the issues and priorities within value chains, but that also allows them each to have the capacity to deploy different tools. And the idea in taking this partnership-led approach is to try to get the right actors to work together and sort of complement each other through the provision of these different financial or support tools. And what that leads into is also the understanding that financing is financial needs are diverse. In certain cases, we're talking about equity, more debt, short-term, long-term, patient capital, different types of interest rates that or cost of financing. We can also talk about the need to address risk and providing risk mitigation or management tools, which are also available through these different types of players. So really complementing each other in that sense, and acting as essentially catalysts, because ultimately the one thing we know is that for all of these issues that we have, that we want to address, we just will never have enough money, between private sector, public sector, philanthropic sector, even impact finance. We really need private sector engagement, and that goes into leading into sustainable solutions, because you don't want sort of a temporary solution or a band-aid solution. And so you really need to bring in the private sector down the line. So I think at that level, the getting the right players involved, and development banks are certainly key in many of these situations to play that role as catalysts to the private sector, and particularly the domestic private sector.
Yes, indeed, Michael. You've talked about the policy role, and we often advocate, as both Ijeoma and Sumaya know, the role of a national development bank at the policy table, the criticality of them sitting with policymakers, because of a really unique perspective a national development bank plays at the nexus of all the key stakeholders in an economy, the real economy, the producers, the value chain players, the other private financiers, the government, the international financial institutions that are providing resources to a national development bank to on lend. And so, and of course, all the other government, MDA government agencies, such as the Trade Promotion Agency or the Economic Development Agency, the role of a national development bank sitting right in the center of things is so critical. Rodrigo, what's your take on some of these challenges that you've heard? You were talking about the value chain perspective, and the need for financial product development, and customizing, tailoring those financial products for the sector. How do you see, I guess, maybe even give cases, because I think you've worked around the world. You've got cases where you've seen agricultural sector, a certain commodity or a certain type of production just missing the boat. And sorry, before I invite you to speak, the organizer kindly reminded me we have a second poll, and then we put that up, and we can then share the results of the two polls. We didn't have too many of you responding to the first poll, but let's put up the second poll as you're speaking, Rodrigo, and hopefully we'll have some participation on that. So over to you, Rodrigo, to give a perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diana. Yes, as an example of our intervention, for instance, in the Dominican Republic, where we work together with Safin Network, in the coconut sector, we have found that the coconut sector need tree renovation, because trees are too old. So you need to renovate in order to improve the production. But the reality is quite difficult to find finances for this type of investment, because it's a long production cycle. So you need more than 5 years probably. So you don't find in the market this type of specific financial products. So I would like to link that, because in fact, in addition to financing, we need also technical assistance. I think that is something quite important. In ITC, all of our development programs have a component of technical assistance, but I think that we need to think the technical assistance as a de-risk investment tool. And of course, we have different type of technical assistance at different levels. At SME level, so in order to develop SMEs business plan, to establish commercial channels, but also technical assistance at SME supplier level, because we need to align the supplier practices with the SME practices. Probably also we need technical assistance at financial institutions in order to adapt these financial products, and at value chain level also, because we need to improve and to develop the market linkages, and finally technical assistance at the market development, because we need to develop an enabling environment for investors, for businesses. So it is the ecosystem. So it's complex. It's quite comprehensive, but I think the role of the technical assistant is key. It's not only about finance, but is technical assistant also how we can de-risk the potential investment.
So it makes me think, if we took the full value chain from well, pre-production, whatever is needed, pre-harvest, all the way through to consumer sale, and we looked at what are all the challenges, the financing needs, and then the role of a national development bank. I'm hearing on the, let's talk about the technical assistance side. I'm hearing that technical assistance to the farmer is incredibly helpful. Sumaya, you were speaking about that, I think, from just modernizing their practices, professionalizing them. I'm sure there's a whole raft of training areas that would be really relevant to Bahamian agriculture producers, similarly in Nigeria, and of course, Rodrigo and Michael, you have a broader, global perspective. You talk about technical assistance to the financial sector. I mean, Ijeoma, your bank works via financial institutions, so I'm sure you're seeing MFIs and others that would value even understanding better the sector, the risks involved, and how to lend to that sector. So that technical assistance is useful there. Then at the market access, let's say the production is done, it's ready to be sold, whatever that looks like, whether it's a full value added product like tomatoes in a can rather than fresh tomatoes, the whole idea of now selling them, and whether you're selling them on an open account terms or whether there's letters of credit, and how you're actually doing your payment arrangements vis-a-vis the buyer, training on that. And we also work a lot with export credit agencies, and so well aware of the buyer risk, non-payment, whatever could happen. So that whole chain, just thinking about the technical assistance requirements. Then, of course, you get down to the specific financing needs. And I think the list of challenges you all have mentioned around wastage and poor soils and transportation challenges and timing of crop rotations, and so the cash flow related to that, mechanization, etc. There's just so many capital needs in that whole value chain. So the question then, and then to pick up your point, Michael, around partnerships, because I think that's critical, and I know the national development banks would agree with me, you're not in it alone. No national development bank is the panacea, is going to do all the financing. It's absolutely, you play a catalytic role. You play a role to mobilize other players domestically and internationally. So I'm wondering, could we talk about then the role of national development banks in this broadest ecosystem with the other players, and how do you address some of these challenges, and what do you see as the solutions if you think about that whole value chain? Sumaya, can I tap you to give a go at that?
Sure. So BDB is really taking two main approaches to dealing with this. The first is a project-based approach where we combine creative concessionary financing with technical assistance and policy advocacy. And then the second is really through our MSME Financing Center. And so what we're trying to do with that is build in an agricultural trade desk that understands the specific needs of each individual agricultural subsector. So as was mentioned earlier, one of the issues is timing and seasonality. So by understanding what that timing and seasonality is, we can develop and design products or financing projects geared toward those specific subsectors. With the trade desk, one of the issues, well, we're not really there yet with in terms of our agricultural exports, but we're also looking at doing that trade financing, that receivables financing, the financing that allows a producer to say, well, I have a contract, but I need the inputs. Can you lend me the money in order to get to capitalize and mobilize? Well, then yes, that's what we're looking to do. The issue of collateral has been a problem. So we're trying to see if we can take agricultural products themselves and use those as collateral. We're looking at with the farmers, they tend to do things like farm everything all at once, have a glut, and then 50% of it goes to waste. They get some money, and then they're in a state of destitution for the rest of the year. That kind of lumpiness in the payments is a challenge for a development bank. So what we need to do is work with farmers to try to even out that lumpiness by diversifying what it is they do, and that also helps us to build resiliency within our agricultural sector, because you're not stacking a subsector. You're not putting all your lime trees on one island. You have a sort of a diverse mix of what you're doing. And then on the project side, we look at a single subsector. We understand the value chain, and we understand how that value chain connects to other value chains. So for example, with the community poultry project that we're doing, we look at the inputs that are coming into the broiler production market. So feed technical assistance, logistics, and everything like that. We create a solution to de-risk that industry for us, to get it to a point where we believe that the farmer production costs are going to make it viable, and based on contracts, equity investments, and debt financing, we essentially force that industry into viability, whereas previously it wouldn't have been viable. We're also doing things like our Long Island ruminant project. We took that island. We understand that historically they do sheep, goats. That's their tradition. They have an affinity for that. We look at their value chain. What do they need to commercialize to increase their production? And then we finance the different aspects of that value chain. So in addition to the actual physical infrastructures, climate smart infrastructure, so that the sheep and goat are not living in the woods anymore. We'll also finance the abattoir, and we'll work to do processing and cold storage on that island to establish not just a couple of sheep and goat houses, but an entire breeding chain, so that we have a continuous stock flowing into our systems. So to summarize all of that, I'd say that we're looking at each island's uniqueness. We're looking at ways to draw from the international community in recognition that the Bahamas is a very unique environment economically and geographically. We're reestablishing historic connections that we once had with agriculture, and we're working with subsistence communities to increase their capacity in combination with policy advocacy. So we are going to government saying, listen, you haven't updated this policy since the 1960s, and it's preventing us from really lending and building up this sector. and working with other agencies is really important to us. So we're working with the Caribbean Agricultural Research Development Institution. We're working with IECA, which is another agency that does training. We're signing MOUs with agencies like the Bahamas Research Institute. Research is a very important part of agricultural lending. We have to understand the sector before we can really confidently say, okay, we're going to put money in this. And once we put that money into the sector, we're confident that when we demonstrate success, private industry is going to say, okay, well, this is something that we can get into. And once they come into the space, we can exit and then move into something else. And so in that way, we systematically build up industries that really don't exist or didn't exist in a commercial way previously.
Wonderful. I'd love to hear what you had to say, because I think what you have just described in those few minutes is an ideal role for a national development bank to play. So congratulations to BDB. Just you have put yourself in the middle of that market to understand what are the key drivers, and then ask yourselves the questions: who can we bring in, and how can we bring solutions?
Yes.
Michael, I see you nodding your head. I could ask you to say something before I go to Ijeoma.
No, I just the response was just so aligned with what it is that we work towards, which is just this crucial piece of rather than trying to find the silver bullet, you need to understand what the specific issues are, how the value chain works, what the real challenges and gaps are, who the existing players are, who you can actually leverage that might already be there, and what needs to be developed that doesn't exist yet. What innovations can be brought to bear and included as well. And really, I mean, it's very closely aligned with what it is that we do, which is really just develop these in-depth analyses of trying to understand exactly what that landscape is and what those challenges are. So it's really great to hear it in practice.
Wonderful. Ijeoma, from DBN's perspective, with a different business model.
Yes, thank you, Diana. So this is where we are actually very uniquely placed as a wholesale development finance institution, and looking at the fact that agriculture is one of the priority sectors of government. So working with the local banks here in catalyzing the local capital towards agriculture is really what we're set up for. And that's what we've been working on. Currently, our portfolio is about 17% agriculture. So beginning to also ramp that up, knowing where the need is in the economy. Working with banks really speaks to the fact that we can't do it alone. No development bank can do it alone. You really need to pull in private sector funds. And currently, I think one of the major initiatives that we have as DBN is providing technical assistance to the banks. We've selected a pilot phase of about five major players in the financial services sector, and really financing this downscaling project through the World Bank, of course, and making them more keen towards lending to MSMEs, kind of changing how they perceive the risk of the SMEs, especially in agriculture. So we have a lot of hopes that that will really achieve the goal and ensure that more monies go into the sector. Another thing we've done is to set up a guarantee company, offering partial credit guarantees to the banks for lending to agriculture as well as other sectors. And that has also been very successful and very well received by the banks, because when you then agree to or partner with the banks to share risk, then more monies and more funding made available to the SMEs, and then we can begin to see progress on mechanization, input, being able to actually affect the areas that where financing is required. Another thing we've set up is a capacity building for going down now to the MSMEs. So even though we are a wholesale bank, we realize how critical it is for there to be education, for SMEs to realize how to formalize their business, how do they do the accounting, what of operations, what kind of people do they need to hire, human resources, even interaction with regulatory agencies in terms of standards and specifications, drug and food agency, how do you go about ensuring that your products are certified and meet the required standards. So those are all the kind of things that we're doing at DBN to ensure that the monies actually make an impact in the agriculture space and in all the other sectors of the economy.
Rodrigo, you were the one who talked about risk and as being a serious obstacle for the sector. Idioma's mentioned the credit risk or credit enhancement or credit guarantee subsidiary they have. So there's certainly credit risk that is a problem. We've talked about climate risk. And I mean, that opens a whole nother area of catastrophic risk coverage, which isn't typically in the bailiwick of national development banks, although I think more and more national development banks are thinking about that as not necessarily directly their product, but a combined product they can offer with related agencies. But there's risk throughout the whole value chain. There's the payment risk of non-payment at the end of it. And Sumaya, you talked about the receivables finance as being a way to monetize those accounts receivables, particularly, well, there's the domestic accounts receivables, but also in the context of international trade, international receivables are important. So from a perspective of risk, what can national development banks do to think about the risk through that value chain and then address it? And maybe I've touched on a few of the ideas, but I bet, Sumaya, you've thought through quite a few of these problems. And maybe you even have some questions to Michael or Rodrigo about how they've seen that, those risk elements being addressed. But could I ask you to give some reflection on the risk question?
Sure, Diana. Agriculture is absolutely perceived historically as one of the more risky things that you can do. When we look at our performing portfolio, we have a number of non-performing loans in the agricultural sector. And if we were to take a purely historical view, we would say that agriculture is not something that we want to do. But we have to take advantage of the benefit of the learning from our portfolio. Why have these businesses failed, right? And developing a risk profile that helps us identify probably key success factors and probably and factors that contribute to likelihood of failure. And that helps us identify whether or not a venture is something that we can get into, whether or not the challenges of the sector are something that a national development bank can actually resolve or not, because we use financial tools. Sometimes the risk is coming from something that the development bank's tools simply can't address. It could be a policy risk that's impacting the sector. So, for example, with poultry in country, we had a number of poultry farms, egg farms, but the government changed the policy. And overnight, something that a development bank would have lent to as a matter of course became something that was very, very risky. And what we saw was the complete decimation of that industry simply almost overnight by virtue of a single change in policy. And that is something our financing can't fix, right? So I really think what it comes down to for us right now is understanding what we can do and what we can't do, and where we can lower risk through partnering with other agencies. So, for example, a risk emerges as a result of lack of technical expertise. So, on our far-flung islands, they don't get the veterinary assistance. They don't get long-term technical assistance. If we can partner with an agency that's going to commit to 2 to 3 years of monitoring and support for that community, then that de-risks that aspect for us. If we know that a risk has come previously because there hasn't been sufficient working capital, and that was the case with one very large agricultural producer. They didn't have sufficient working capital in order to provide feed input, and as a result, they lost almost $1 million worth of birds and so forth for want of $25,000, right? So that is a problem that, yes, you failed previously, but we understand why you failed, and we're not going to count that against you. That's a risk that we can potentially help to mitigate. So for us, it's really going to come down to understanding the sector, the risks that emerge, and what we can actually solve.
Rodrigo, any responses on the question of risk and risk mitigation strategies? I mean, risks are everywhere. I think Sumaya has been very clear in this sector. They're, particularly a set of uncertainties. And of course, with climate change, we've touched on not just the risks of climate change in terms of flooding and hurricanes that could wipe out transportation ports that would have otherwise been used to deliver shipments. Your work from ITC, thinking about some of the risks associated with this industry, could you maybe elaborate, give us some insights from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Diana. Well, first of all, I fully agree with Sumaya. I think it's key to understand the sector. That is something that probably the financial institution, the development bank, need to have the technical expertise inside. So that is something that I think it is important to highlight. From the ITC and the Alliance for Action initiative, well, as I said before, we work with the SMEs, with the cooperative, in order to upgrade the practices and align it to the sustainability criteria. I think that is one of the key things, and it could allow this enterprise to have access to impact funds or access to finance, generally speaking. On the other side, we develop public-private alliances. That is something I think that is quite important. We need to bring together private, public actors to discuss and to try to find together solutions at value chain level, of course. And then I think that it's important also the commercial alliances between SMEs and local buyers, but also between SMEs, cooperative, and international global buyers. So I think that it's quite important, the ecosystem. As Michael said before, there is no silver bullet. So we need to think in the ecosystem, the key role of the value chain analysis to understand each specific value chain. Yes, and so it's we need to think. We need to see the big picture at the end.
Indeed. Well, we've put two polls to the audience. I'm going to ask our conference organizers just to share the results. I think they were a few questions ago, but we asked the first question was, what do you see as the biggest obstacle facing farmers? Could we share the results of that video or that poll? So tangible security, yes. A lack of awareness to the high perceived risk and lack of collateral. Absolutely, those are two of the main things that we touched on. Let's talk about the next poll, which was about the main challenges farmers face in the value chain, be it finance, be it access to farming equipment, storage, whatever. We have a few more answers here. So yeah, market access, lack of training, asymmetry of information, risks, market access, capital to support operations, investments, the long-term investments in infrastructure. Yep. Yes, exactly. Panelists, any comments on those? I think we've touched on these issues, so I suspect you'll agree entirely. But I'll just open the floor to you before we open the Q&A. No. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 25 past. So I'm going to ask the question, and I'm not sure how we do the Q&A function, whether there are any questions to our audience, because we do have only 5 minutes left. And if not, yeah, okay, I've just been told we don't have any questions. Because we've answered everything, I know that's the case.
I have 2 quick points that I wanted to raise before we
Yes.
close up.
I'd like to see everybody to have 1 or 2 quick points in closing. So you.
Yeah. So very quick points. I'm not trying to, but it just so happens that I might be plugging a webinar series that we're actually running with the Platform for Agricultural Risk Management, PARM, which is also hosted by IFAD and the ILO's social finance initiative. And it's all about agricultural risk management as a result of COVID. And we've only had a first session, and the first session was primarily an introduction to what the available tools are for risk management in the agricultural sector, and seeing that there's a number of tools on the side of the value chain players. So that includes the Agri-SMEs and the producers, et cetera, as well as on the financial service providers. And so we've talked about some of the guarantees and the importance of credits, of investments, certainly of TA. We could mention insurance in there also, which I think is an important one. But we're going to be having these regularly through the rest of the year, and it'll be interesting because we're going to have some case studies to really see how specific actors have addressed specific risks related really to the COVID. Now, the second point that I wanted to make was also around some of these longer term risks, because we're talking a lot about some of the risks that need to be addressed at the local level, sort of individually. But then, you do have some of these issues, many of which are brought up through the SDGs, which really are issues that are common and that again require a collaborative approach. And in that sense, we're also part of, and this is also being led by IFAD. And it's very relevant here because it's the Finance in Common Summit, which is the first ever summit to bring together public development banks, really to address issues and solutions related to the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement, and really realizing those and taking a common approach to that. And what IFAD has done is selected a specific group of those public development banks and brought them together to form an agricultural cluster. And that agriculture cluster is going to be addressing really those specific needs going forward, and what these banks can do together in common and what they can commit to going forward. And that's sort of really just trying to address, I think, the bigger picture as well. So those are some interesting initiatives there. I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I unmuted because my husband's making coffee. Yes, I'm on now. He was making coffee in the background. It was rather loud. I was just going to say, we only have a minute left and I fear we'll be cut off. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank my dear panelists. It's been a fantastic conversation. I think you've brought such insights and wisdom from your experience. I think we've all collectively learned a lot. And I just, again, want to thank you, and thank you to the audience and those who are viewing this online at a later date. It's been fun and very informative, and I wish you all well and stay safe, and all the best wishes to you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.